Quake 4 is quite obviously the fourth mainline entry in the Quake series, but while I've heard the name Quake before, I've never actually played any of the games in the series, and in keeping with my usual MO, I went into reviewing this one completely blind, so I did a little bit of research after I played the game, and here are the highlights. The Quake series spawned in 1996 as the successor and the brother series to id Software's all-time classic Doom. And just like in Doom, humans are fucking around with teleporters and end up unleashing an army of monsters onto the Earth. Quake is this odd blend of sci-fi and fantasy, with the player needing to collect 4 magic runes from 4 different dimensions in order to disable the teleporters and stop the invasion of Earth. Quake is actually the reason why John Romero split off from id Software in 1996 to go on and form Ion Storm. Fast forward a year and Quake 2 was already on store shelves, with publishing rights this time taken up by Activision. Quake 2 completely ditched the fantasy setting and themes, with the player this time controlling a space marine named Matthew Kane in his fight against a cybernetic alien race known as the Strogg. 2 years later, in 1999, we got the release of Quake 3 Arena. Quake 3 brought back some of the fantasy elements, but it also completely removed the single-player campaign. This was a multiplayer-first arena shooter to the core that eventually became the de facto Quake experience thanks to the modding community. And obviously, there's a lot more that I could talk about with the multiplayer for these games. I mean, these games basically set the standard for multiplayer FPS, and they're often featured on lists of the best games ever made, simply for their contribution to multiplayer gaming in the 90s. But after the release of Quake 3, the series went dormant until 6 years later, when it returned in the form of Quake 4.
I hear their voices when I sleep.
This 2005 release chose instead to continue the story from Quake 2, with Matthew Kane continuing his fight against the Strogg. Developed by Raven Software, published by Activision, and released in October of 2005, a console port was also announced as part of the Xbox 360 launch lineup. It was the first game in the series to not be developed by id Software, who were already committed to the development of 2004's Doom 3 and furthering their id Tech 4 engine. Instead, they chose to allow Quake 4 to use the id Tech 4 engine and to merely collaborate with the main development studio, Raven Software, who'd previously released Soldier of Fortune 2 and the excellent Jedi Outcast. 20 years later, the choice to allow Raven Software to develop Quake 4 still leaves fans wondering what could have been if id Software had just made it themselves. The game was obviously meant for PC, so the PC reviews rolled in and it got mostly 8s, with the reviewers praising the graphics and the lighting on display in this use of the id Tech 4 engine. But the Xbox 360 version didn't fare quite so well, receiving mostly 6s and 7s. The main complaints all really boiled down to just poor optimization, and one reviewer gave it 2 stars out of 5 and penned this in his review.
Activision's Quake 4 is positively shameful. Although there's clearly much fun to be had blasting belligerent aliens in the game's gloomy, hey, that's my name, claustrophobic corridors, Quake 4 is beset by shoddy frame rate issues, something which is unforgivable given the power of the Xbox 360.
It was a classic case of a console port trying to run on hardware that wasn't up to running a game that was designed for cutting-edge PC tech. You play as Matthew Kane, this time on the Strogg's planet, fighting through one dark corridor after another in an attempt to destroy the alien scum. The game drops you in with absolutely no context, assuming that you've played and you still remember everything from Quake 2, which, by the way, came out 8 years prior to this. If you're a newcomer and you have no experience with actually having played the Quake games, or maybe you just don't remember what happened in Quake 2, well, you might have some questions like, who the hell is Matthew Kane? Who are the Strogg? Where the fuck are you? But none of that's explained. Instead, you just take orders from the generic Marines around you, you go through the dark corridors killing alien robot-looking dudes, and occasionally you'll man a turret or you'll climb into a tank or into a mech. About halfway through the game, and after you've spent a good 4 hours falling asleep with your controller in hand, the game takes a turn. You get captured by the Strogg and put onto a conveyor belt where you find yourself being turned into one of the Borg-like Strogg. This scene is actually pretty crazy. It's so brutal as you're being Stroggified in first person. It reminds me a lot of the scene in Prey when you get abducted, which, by the way, also used the id Tech 4 engine. Go figure. But before the Stroggification gets completed, you get rescued by some Marines, and you now have the ability to bypass Strogg biometric security systems, making you the only man for the job. But nothing actually changes. Despite getting off the conveyor belt and looking in the mirror at how much you've changed, there's really no gameplay impact. You don't move any faster, you don't reload any quicker, you don't jump any higher, none of that. The only real change is that you can use these fleshy stations around to heal up. The gameplay stays the same boring ass slog through dark, generic corridors. Along the way, you'll hear references to someone called the Macron, and I don't know, the game doesn't really tell you what it is, but now that I'm writing in the script and I'm looking this up, it turns out that this is the supreme leader for the Strogg. And I guess you can kind of like piece that together from the context clues, but without any background, it kind of just flies in one ear and out the other, especially when the Marines start talking to you as if you know what's going on. The goal is to point some lasers at a tower in the distance in order to disable some security measures and get you in to take down the Nexus. And at the end of the game, you fight the Macron, then the Nexus, which is this giant brain serving as the hive mind for the Strogg. And it's pretty on the nose for this to just be a brain for the hive mind. Really showing our creativity here, guys. And really, that's about it for the story. Once you do finally kill off the Nexus brain, the game ends on a cliffhanger as Kane receives orders for his next assignment.
Yes? Yes, sir. What is it? But, sir, Kane just got back. Yes, sir. I'll see to it. Kane, you have new orders.
The gameplay does not make up for the story in the slightest. Put simply, this game runs like ass. This has got to be one of the worst performing first-person shooters that I've played on the Xbox 360. Anytime I get into a firefight, the frame rate would just chug to a crawl. It's hard enough to push through the boring ass story, but it's even worse when the game is giving me a fucking migraine. GameSpot actually gave it their award for most aggravating frame rate in their worst games of 2005 list, which sounds a little hyperbolic, but the frame rate chugs so much that the machine guns can't even fire at a consistent rate. And like most of these old school FPS games, there are 10 guns in your arsenal. One problem that I ran into is that there's no weapon wheel to quickly switch weapons. Instead, you have to hit either the left or the right bumper to cycle through the weapons. And there is a D-pad selector, but it makes no sense. There's too many options and it takes way too many presses to find the gun that you want on the fly. There are really only 2 guns that I want to talk about out of the 10. Otherwise, this video would take way too long. The first one is the Dark Matter gun. This sort of feels like it's supposed to be Quake's BFG. You get this really late into the game and it fires these big, giant dark matter balls through the air. But it's really weird that it doesn't always kill everything in one hit. So it's not like the BFG, which always feels like your oh shit, get out of jail free card. But the Dark Matter gun did end up saving my bacon when I used it against the bosses.
Now that's a lot of damage!
The gun that I really want to talk about is the nail gun. The nail gun is this heavy machine gun that absolutely shreds enemies. And later on in the game, you get an upgrade that lets you hold the left trigger to zoom in and it makes the bullets hone in on the enemies. This gun fucks. It ended up becoming my go-to weapon, but unfortunately, the optimization for this Xbox 360 port is absolute dog shit, and every time you scope in, the frame rate just grinds to a crawl. The audio is disappointing too. Most of the time, it's just eerily quiet, and when the music finally does play during combat, it's mixed so far into the background that it doesn't actually add anything to the action. But hey, at least there are some great voice actors like Phil Lamar, Carrie Payton, and Steve Bloom even voices a lot of the background Marines.
Frankly, I don't think even one of our advanced medical facilities could do much. Those Strogg implants are too deeply connected to your central nervous system.
Holy fuck! I'm coming!
Visually, the shadows and the lighting are great, but the Leet Speak menus really date the whole experience.
Leet is a type of computer language that was first used by hackers and online gamers to kind of covertly communicate with one another.
Elite is short for elite because it's common for more advanced computer users.
But nothing dates it all quite as much as the completely flat, low-res JPEG skyboxes. Up until the final mission, you'll just be making your way through dark corridors, more dark corridors, and then more dark corridors. Then at the very end of the game, you get locked in these 2 different arenas where you're stuck in some of the worst implementations of arena combat that I've seen. There's no power-ups, there's not much armor or health to run around and pick up. There's nothing to like really make you move around this arena and fight off the monsters. And there's not even much variation in the enemy and the weapon design that forces you to switch up your tactics. And the game is pretty much a cakewalk up until these last fights. When I got into these, I just kept getting my ass handed to me, and I was incredibly annoyed by how much time I was wasting with all the runbacks just because of the gaps between checkpoints. I ended up just popping on the 2016 Doom OST as my own background music to pump me up and get through these fights. And in the final battle, I realized that I could just sit in the corner hiding from the enemies while I chipped away at the Nexus. As for the multiplayer, this is hard to cover since I never played it before the servers went dark. I know you can still play it on PC, but that's not really something I'm interested in doing. Reading up on it and looking back over gameplay footage, it plays just like the arena shooters of old. You run around picking up floating power-ups and weapons, you hit some jump pads and some portals here and there, you run quickly through doors and around corners in a deathmatch arena. Just a good old-fashioned arena shooter, which is part of why it didn't take off on the Xbox 360. It just couldn't stack up against Perfect Dark Zero and the mammoth Call of Duty 2 for the early Xbox 360 adopters that were playing on Xbox Live. Quake 4 was never added as part of Xbox's backwards compatibility program, so this console version is forever locked to sub 25 FPS on the Xbox 360. It ended up being the last single-player Quake game, with 2007's multiplayer-only Enemy Territory Quake Wars and 2016's Quake Champions being the last 2 attempts to bring the series back into relevance. Every room blurred together, the frame rate gave me headaches, and the stratification is the only part of the game that's memorable to me. It's not just bad, it's boring. Quake 4 was one of the hardest games for me to finish, not because it's difficult, but because it's bland. And a bland game is always harder to play than a bad one. For a launch title that was supposed to show off what the Xbox 360 could do, Quake 4 did the exact opposite. What a fucking shit-ass game. It's a little hard to believe it, but it's already been 20 years since the launch of the Xbox 360 all the way back in November of 2005. So I decided to revisit all of the titles available at the launch of the Xbox 360, and because there are 17 games to play and revisit, I enlisted the help of my buddy Gloom is Dead. He makes incredibly thoughtful and introspective reviews of games from the golden era. If you want to see more, you can find a link to our playlist covering all 17 games in the pinned comment below.